I've been going through this stack of historical records for today's deep dive, and, it feels like we need to just take a red marker to the standard map of early American history.
It does. I mean, the textbook version is always conquistadors sailing straight from Seville.
Exactly. Straight to Florida to plant a flag. But the sources we're looking at today argue that map is, well, fundamentally flawed.
It is. They make this really compelling case that early Florida wasn't so much an outpost of Spain, but they call it a strategic and demographic extension of Puerto Rico.
The Borikén-La Florida axis, that's the term they use. And the argument is you just cannot separate the history of Florida from Borikén, which is, of course, the indigenous name for Puerto Rico.
Right. It positions Florida as this kind of colonial laboratory. And it wasn't run by guys fresh off the boat from Europe. It was run by Puerto Rican natives and Criollos people born in the Americas.
Which completely shifts the center of gravity.
And that shift really starts with what the research calls geographical intelligence. Because long before 1513, the Taino people already had this sophisticated mental map of the whole Caribbean basin, and it included Florida.
Yeah, I was looking at the logistics of that, and it totally makes sense. We're not talking about little rafts here.
No, not at all.
The Taino used what they called canoa. These are massive dugout canoes. Some could hold up to 150 people.
So they were routinely navigating these complex ocean currents to the mainland, which means when Juan Ponce de Leon discovered Florida,
He was really just following directions.
exactly, he was relying entirely on Taino guides who already knew the waters. But here's where the axis theory gets really interesting. That information flow wasn't just one way.
Ah, the resistance axis. This is where the story gets gritty.
It does. The sources detail how Taínos fled the Spanish forced labor system in Puerto Rico, the encomienda, and they took those huge canoes to Florida for sanctuary.
And they actually founded a refugee village there, didn't they? Abibo, under the protection of the Calusa Nation.
Yes. And that context changes everything. So when you read about the Calusa attacking Ponce de Leon, it wasn't just, random hostility.
No, it was an intellectual defense. They had been forewarned.
Forewarned. The refugees brought specific intelligence about Spanish cruelty, about their slave raiding. The Calusa knew exactly who was coming. So it wasn't natives versus explorers. It was a sophisticated inter-island network blocking an invasion.
But the Spanish, or I guess more accurately, the Puerto Rican colonial administration, they were persistent.
Very. And if you look at the 1521 expedition, you can see the strategy shift. It wasn't just a military trip. It was an attempt at terraforming.
That manifest is wild. They were literally trying to clone the Puerto Rican agricultural ecosystem. They brought the first horses to the U.S. mainland, 50 of them.
And cattle and seeds, but not from Spain. These were all transplants from Puerto Rican farms.
And even though Ponce de Leon died after that attempt, the connection it stayed. I mean, he was buried in San Juan, not back in Spain.
And his family turned the whole thing into a dynasty. You have his grandson becoming the first native-born interim governor of Puerto Rico.
And then his great-grandson, get this, Nicholas Ponce de Leon II, he served as acting governor of Florida.
Think about that. The man overseeing the groundbreaking of the Castillo de San Marcos, the most iconic Spanish fort in the U.S., was the great-grandson of the man who discovered Florida.
It's a continuous loop rooted in San Juan, not Madrid.
And that integration bled right into the language.
Okay, yeah, the linguistic legacy is so surprising. We all know words like huracan for hurricane or hamaca for hammock are Taino.
They became the survival vocabulary for the whole region. But maybe the most significant example is the origin of the word Seminole.
This was the real aha moment for me. I had no idea this traced back to the Caribbean.
It comes from the Taino word cimarron. It means runaway. The Spanish adopted it to describe anyone, native or African, living outside their control.
And then local tribes in Florida adapted that into Semilone,
which eventually was anglicized into Seminole.
So the very name of one of the most definitive tribes in Florida history has Taino DNA. It just shows how deep it all went.
And it kept going. By 1676, nearly half the soldiers stationed in St. Augustine were Criollos, most with Caribbean roots. It was, for all intents and purposes, a Caribbean outpost.
So if the indigenous people of Borikén provided the map, the labor, the survival vocabulary, and even the warning systems, it leaves us with a pretty big question.
It does. And the question is this. Should we view early Florida history not as a chapter of European colonial history, but as a chapter of Caribbean indigenous history?
That is a perspective shift that definitely redraws the map. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.